Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Politics in the Pulpit, a lectionary-based preaching resource designed to ask the provocative question of whether, and if so, how, politics should appear in our preaching this week. My name is Jenny Mills, and I'm currently the Secretary for Education and Learning in the United Reformed Church. In the past week, I attended the United Reformed Church Ministers gathering, and we had some amazing speakers, including Podrigo Chuma and Najla Kassab, the president of the World Council of Reformed Churches. So I've had a pretty full-on, enriching and teaching week. Each week, I'm joined by a guest from a different place and space on the pulpit and political landscape. Today, I am very pleased to introduce the Revd Lynita Conradie. Lynita is a qualified barrister and worked for 19 years in Namibia as a Methodist minister and human rights lawyer. Lynita moved to the UK in 2013, and in 2021, she was awarded a professional doctorate in practical theology by the University of Chester. She currently serves 3 Methodist churches in the UK. Lynita, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. So this podcast is entitled Politics in the Pulpit. And one of the things I've read about you is that you want to empower people to hear the Bible in a way that speaks to 21st century situations, and that justice is important. How do you see yourself as both theologian, preacher, and politician? How do those things all intermingle?
Well, I think that we cannot divorce politics from the rest of our lives. We cannot divorce our spiritual lives from our secular lives, if you like. So I think it's very important that people who come to church on a Sunday encounter the same things that they would encounter during the week. In other words, encountering God in their everyday lives and encountering the Bible in their everyday lives. The Bible with all its difficulties and problematic and its ancient, the fact that it's ancient writing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that connecting the context of the ancient writings and the scriptures with key justice and issues and political events. What sort of what from your context, from your life, from your experience, what are the key justice issues or political events that have an effect with us still today?
Well, I think certainly not specifically within the context in which I serve now, but I think just in general. I think marginalization is still a very big issue. The marginalization of minority groups, marginalization of people who are different in one way or another from the majority of people in the world. Yeah. And a lot of that is very subtle and often not even intended, but somehow still kind of manifests itself, as it were.
Mm-hmm. And so that marginalization has driven a lot of your work as a human rights lawyer and also as a minister?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, each week my JPIT colleagues offer us some things to keep an eye on. Well, they keep an eye on the world for us, and so they've offered us some things that we'd like to hold in mind as we come to have our conversations about the text for this Sunday. So, exams for students across England and Wales begin this week. It's been Christian Aid Week. And that's focused on rising levels of global poverty caused by COVID-19, conflict and drought induced by climate change. We think of the many churches that will have been giving and fundraising for a more just world. On the 25th of May, we mark the 3rd anniversary of the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minnesota, which drew many protests around the world. And with a racially motivated shooting last week in Buffalo, we might ask actually what has changed. We've also had the UK government pressing ahead with implementing its much criticised asylum policies, announcing it expects to send the first group of 50 migrants to Rwanda in the next couple of weeks. Also in the news has been the Northern Ireland and its post-Brexit trading arrangements, with a political impasse in the Northern Ireland Assembly following elections there, and the government's threat to unilaterally revoke parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol that it negotiated with the EU. And our conversation continues to take place against the backdrop of the conflict in Ukraine, where Putin's invasion has now triggered Finland and Norway to apply to join NATO. And as we yearn for war to end, we continue to pray and wonder what it is that will make for peace. So with so much trouble in the world and with rising costs of living and MPs wading into telling people how to manage their own cost of living, we come with our newspapers in one hand and our Bibles in the other. And I just wonder where you would like us to start this week with the texts that have been set this week.
I think before we get to that, there were just two other issues which I wanted to flag up. The one is I heard last week, to my shock and horror, a journalist saying that one of the members of the cabinet had suggested that possibly the Human Rights Bill or the Human Rights Act should be scrapped. And I was absolutely horrified to hear that.
All right.
And especially because the journalist seemed to be kind of quite in favor of that and trying to blame the fact that human rights lawyers are fighting for the rights of people for some of the ills in the world. And then I heard this morning that there are moves afoot to increase the powers of stop and search for police in order to fight crime. And I kind of wondered whether that was addressing the symptoms rather than getting to the cause and the root cause of knife and other violent crime.
And I think that whole idea of how many of the things that we do at the moment are actually hitting the root cause, that applies also to some of the child poverty stuff. But you're right, this idea of, well, we always doing kind of knee-jerk reactions. Well, thank you for raising those two issues. And where would you like us to start with our texts?
Well, I thought we'd start with the passage from Acts chapter 16, which is the passage about Lydia. I think that in a very strange way, there are connections between the three lectionary passages, although my gut reaction when I was approached to do this is, now I know why I don't use the lectionary between Easter and Pentecost. I'm not actually doing that this year. I'm doing a sermon series. But I then stopped and looked at these three passages and did a bit of background reading and then discovered that there were some connections somewhere in a very strange kind of a way.
Okay.
But we're starting with the Acts chapter 16 passage. And what struck me there is that Paul had this vision and a man from Macedonia pleaded with him to come and help them. Yeah. And when he got to Philippi, he went to this place where some women were praying, and rather than meet a man from Macedonia, he met a woman called Lydia, from Thyatira, and so that I found that quite ironical that he had this vision from a man, and also that this woman was named, because a lot of women in the Bible are not named.
Yes,
and also that she was obviously a woman of some means. She was most likely a Gentile, but had obviously been exposed to some kind of faith, and then was open to the Spirit, and then ended up offering Paul hospitality. And I noticed if you go to the end of Acts chapter 16, after Paul left prison and before he left the area, he went back to her house.
Yes. Yeah, I was hit too by this idea that it was a man pleading with him, and it kind of made me reflect on how God can surprise us sometimes.
Yeah.
And in terms of the hospitality, I thought that was very interesting. And as you said, she was a woman of means, and she offered hospitality. Well, how do you see hospitality being something that we can offer, and how important is that?
I think hospitality is very important, but I think that people have a very narrow view of what hospitality means. I was running a Lent course recently, and I was trying to get people to think of hospitality as more than offering somebody a cup of tea and coffee at church or in your home. Because for me, hospitality means making room for other people in the world, in your life, in your encounters, whether that's over a cup of tea or simply seeing someone in the street. So I think we have a very narrow view of hospitality somehow.
And do you think that's a cultural thing?
It could be a cultural thing. I think in the context that I come from Africa, I think hospitality comes very naturally to people. People are just naturally more spontaneous. I think people here are not lacking hospitality. I'm not quite sure what the word is for that. Not inhospitable, it doesn't sound really right, but you know what I mean. I think that people are much more reserved and maybe just a little bit more sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
I think we kind of do. I think when you said about having a cup of tea, I think that's quite, it is something I am often surprised when I go to visit my Libyan friends, and there is this absolute abundance of welcome, and the family all comes along, and it feels like it's a holistic thing. It's welcome to all of me from all of them, rather than perhaps a simple thing.
Yes. Yes, I think hospitality, but as I said, I do think that so in our churches, it's not only about offering somebody a cup of tea or coffee, but also that when you offer that tea or coffee, especially for somebody who's coming for the first time, you don't just leave them with a cup of tea or coffee, but you actually talk to them as well.
Absolutely. And when we talk about marginalization, I think that sense of we find it easier to be hospitable to those with whom we have something in common.
Yeah. So I think very often a church may make its facilities accessible to people in wheelchairs. One would arrive at a church and you could possibly be offered a Braille book, and that looks really good. And then afterwards, you're offered a cup of tea or coffee, and then you're kind of left standing in the middle of nowhere or sitting in the middle of nowhere because people have done what they wanted to do. They've done what the correct things are. They've made it accessible. They've given you a cup of tea or coffee, but maybe, we'll go and talk to our friends rather. And I don't think people intend to be
exclusive.
It's just the way it is.
And that coming back to the text, when as you said, Lydia was already a believer, but then Paul preaches and she listens, and that whole sense of the Lord opened her heart, and then her and her household were baptized.
Yes.
That sense of a response to what she heard.
Yes.
How do you hear that one?
I think so. And I mean, I was reminded actually of the story in Acts chapter 10 of Cornelius, because he was also a Gentile and he also responded. So, and Paul responded as well. He didn't question, can I go to this woman's house because she's not Jewish? So the hospitality, in a sense, came from both sides, because not only did Lydia offer hospitality, but Paul responded, because I think obviously hospitality has got two sides.
Yes.
So I can offer you hospitality. If you're not going to respond, well, then that makes it more difficult.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah. The one other point that I thought was quite interesting is how in 16:12 it says, "We remained in this city for some days." How the idea of waiting on the Lord, I think sometimes we kind of want action rather than being, as people of faith.
Yes, I think that's true, and I'm definitely fall into that category. I'm not so much I'm more a doer than a beer, if you know what I mean. But what I also found interesting is that Paul didn't go and look for a church or a synagogue or whatever. He went to the gate by the river and he saw there were women praying.
Yeah.
So they were worshipping. They didn't need a building for that. Something else that's interesting I came across in one of the commentaries is in verse 15, it said she urged and she prevailed upon them at the end of verse 15. And evidently, according to one commentator, the word prevailed is used only once else in the New Testament, and that's in the story of the journey to Emmaus, when the two disciples prevailed upon Jesus to stay with them. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yes, and that the echo of that accompaniment, isn't it? The accompanying and opening the Word of God, and opening them to hearing the Word of God and the love of God.
Yes.
Okay, so do you want to take us on into one of the other texts?
Yes, I can take you on to Revelation, and I must admit, as was the case with the the man whose podcast I listen to, I'm also not naturally drawn to the book of Revelation. I find it actually really quite scary and mysterious. But I did find it really interesting that the picture that is painted here is, for me, reminiscent of Walter Brueggemann's prophetic imagination. That an imagining an alternative world to the world in which we find ourselves right now.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that it's imagining a utopia, but it's imagining a world where there are no barriers, where there's no fear, where you don't need a temple in which to worship, where there's no night or day. I was a little bit uncomfortable with verse 26, who talked about nobody who's unclean will enter. But then I was thinking, well, perhaps if you were unclean or whatever, you wouldn't really want to be in that place anyway. And then there was this whole picture of water and life and the river of life and the fruit, and it's all sorts of images that come to mind from that. Reminiscent of the Genesis story of Eden and the tree of life, and in a sense a restoration of that kind of time of paradise.
With so much going on in the world that saddens us, and with so much going on that just seems to encourage division and encourage power battles and all of these things, this is an incredibly welcoming and inclusive text, isn't it?
Indeed, yes.
How do we hold some of that in tension with what we see going on around us, and still preach words of hope within all of this?
I think that is very difficult. I think I think one's got. I always tell my congregation that hope is not a glib, blind optimism. I think it's got to be much deeper than that. It's got to say something like, well, it's almost like where there's hope, there's life, rather than where there's life, there's hope. Because if there's no more hope, well, then there can be no more life.
Yes. And I think we see the glimpses of that in some of the situations that are being reported from Ukraine.
Yes.
Some of the people and the resilience of these amazing people, and we can read stories of people. I wonder if there's any other images of hope that you feel are being communicated within some of the difficult situations around the world.
Yeah, and I think also the way in which you've had people from here, firemen traveling all the way to Poland to deliver equipment, collecting all sorts of things, food and clothing and medicines and doctors risking their lives to try and help people. I mean, I think in the midst of all of that, there is always going to be the sort of good that kind of manifests itself in the midst of all the evil.
Yeah, the bringers of hope, really, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
And I think in the text from Revelation, it's kind of about us. It's being responsible for the world.
Yes.
There's having this sense of everybody is included, and it's not about imposing, but it's about working with creation. Indeed. And being part of all of that new hope. How do you see this in terms of kind of an anti-establishment thing? This idea that it's coming back to God rather than which in the Revelation, the sort of against the Roman Empire rhetoric.
That's right. Yes, because I think this is contrasting the world which God would want and the world of the Roman Empire and the oppression that was taking place. And this is what the writer of the book is trying to portray. I think that that there is more. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be a world of oppression and exclusion and marginalization. It can be something different. If and I mean, water is such a powerful symbol, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's a particularly powerful symbol in the country that I come from, Namibia, which is so dry. And in fact, there was a program on television last night about the Namib Desert and how the mist from the sea is what keeps many of the creatures alive. That little bit of moisture, and water, in a sense, is a symbol of life. So one can kind of probably not take it too far, but how do we sort of work in a world where there's so much desert and so much destruction and so much death? What kind of water do we offer? What sort of water of life do we offer?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And the sense that creation has these ways of responding even to lack. I mean, I love that idea of the desert. And somebody was telling me the other day they have artificial grass, but then a dandelion was growing up in the middle of this artificial grass. And her son, who was only very small, wouldn't let her pull this dandelion out because they just thought it was, it was so precious to them. And yet she saw it as a weed. But creation has a way of kind of healing itself, of finding the cracks, of finding of keeping going, doesn't it? That's quite a powerful thing, even when humankind is not perhaps behaving in the best way towards it.
That's correct. Yes, and I mean, it showed these creatures in when the sun goes down in the Namib Desert and the temperature goes down, and the mist comes in from the sea, and these creatures burrow into the sand dunes and find little bits of moisture and all sorts of other little creatures. It's absolutely fascinating to kind of think of that and how powerful that is.
Yeah. And then the idea of water as part of our baptism, that connection with the sacrament, and how we are renewed by that profession of faith and by that welcome into God's community, but equally the responsibility that brings.
Yes, indeed, and that we have to keep refreshing ourselves and the world in the way that we refresh our bodies with water or liquids. We need to keep refreshing the world somehow.
Yeah. So that sense of finding where the need is that we can actually respond to. I think one of the issues is we could become so overwhelmed by the problems in the world, can't we?
Indeed, yes.
And it's choosing where actually we can actually do something that can make a difference, that can help or support.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that one. And if we go on to, did you have the gospel reading?
Yes, I have John chapter 14 because I kind of thought that made more sense in the context of the other two passages than John 5. So I've chosen, and I think John 14 is interesting from a number of points of view, and has some strange connections, possibly, if somewhat tenuous. And the first thing is that the reading comes after Easter, and yet it's part of the farewell discourses of Jesus. So it's written in a context of before Jesus' death, and yet it's given to us after the resurrection.
Yeah.
But there is some interesting things which I think complements what we've been saying, and one of them is Jesus talks about keeping. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I like the way that he doesn't say obey, because I think obey has all sorts of pejorative meanings to it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And if we were all to keep the commandments, and I'm not meaning that in a legalistic way, but if we were all to live according to the teaching of Jesus, well, then we wouldn't have all these problems in the world, and then we would be able to bring about this new world order that Revelation talks about.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And then something else that struck me was in verse 27, where Jesus talks about, my peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled. So Jesus is offering this peace, knowing that not only he, but all his disciples are really, really anxious about what's going to be happening the next day. So he's not saying, I'm giving you my peace, and that's going to solve all the problems in the world, and it's going to take everything that's terrible away. No, I'm going to give you the peace that passes all understanding, and don't let your heart be troubled. So I'm going to come and try and just calm down and keep you cool, and don't be afraid. But you must keep my commandments if you want this world to be a better place. Is what I'm possibly reading too much into, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
And that piece in that context as well is, at that point, Pax Romana will have been, the piece of the kind of Roman Empire would have been something against which they all struggled. And we also, we had that in the Revelation text, this sense of the Roman occupation. And he's saying there's a different way to be. You don't have to follow you don't have to be constrained by some of the structures. My way is a different way of being. I think that idea of living life the Jesus way gives us different things to focus on.
Yes, it's becoming an alternative to what Brueggemann keeps talking about, the dominant narrative of consumerism and militarism, and it's what's in it for me, and it's all about political point scoring and rhetoric and all that sort of thing, and that's not the way that Jesus wants it to be. No. That's not how we need to live. And I wonder sometimes whether we are so busy trying to judging other people that we don't actually just talk about, well, actually we do have a message of good news, and that's not about whether you go to heaven or not, whatever that means. It's rather about you can live a different way, and if you live a different way, well, then there won't be violence in Northern Ireland, and there won't be racial shootings, and there won't be a necessity to increase the stop and search powers of the police, etc., etc. We approach these things from a different angle. So instead of saying to the young people, we're going to all make sure that you haven't got knives, rather, well, what alternative can we give you so that you won't actually want to stab somebody else? Why don't we offer you a football or music or something else? Shouldn't we rather concentrate on that rather than just wanting to have these like hard, heavy-handed, high-handed tactics all the time? But that's part of the dominant narrative.
So instead of kind of making a law to limit something, we actually try and find other ways of enabling people and enriching people. So when there's the MP talks about how he can make meals for 30 pence a day, and when he's talking about the cost of living crisis, and actually he has the benefit of having the opportunity to do batch cooking, so he's got somewhere to store the food, and he's got the electricity to make the food, and he has a big enough shopping basket to be able to pay for a lot of food to do batch cooking. And I think when we are people of privilege and we are people of opportunity, we tend to forget that for some people there aren't alternatives. And you're right, if we can offer those alternatives to some people and to show them there's a different way to be.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not even sure that whether you offer buy one get one free on a packet of crisps or not, whether that's going to make any difference to the obesity level in the country. I think there must be different way, and I'm not an expert on all these things, but I sometimes wonder whether we just don't try and get an easy. It's a bit like the doctor says, well, your headache's getting worse, I'm going to increase your painkillers, but the doctor never thinks, well, maybe I should actually work out why you're getting these headaches and why they're getting worse.
Yes. And that idea is that quote, isn't it? I think I've probably used it already. It's that, let's stop pulling people out of the river and start going upstream and see why they're falling in. Yeah. When are we starting to tackle some of these things at source? And while it's criminal that more and more people are using food banks, why is that the case? Let's look at the root causes of some of these issues.
Well, especially because there are those who use food banks. There are plenty of others who pay money because they're too fat and they go to whatever Slimming World or whatever those other places are that offer people solutions to their weight problems. So on the one hand, you've got people starving and going to food banks. On the other hand, you've got people that eat too much and have to pay to get help with. So it's and I'm not judging the people who go to Slimming World or Weight Watch. I'm not judging them, and I'm saying it's just so ironical that there's just two kind of opposite ends of the opposite poles, as it were.
Yeah. And do you think, I think sometimes it's we get into habits, don't we? that hurt and harm ourselves, and we struggle to find ways out of those things. I think in the text of John that the world is a scary place. It's scary for the disciples. I think your phrase about Jesus calm down, Jesus saying calm down. The gospel speaks into the fact that for many people the world is a scary, frightening place.
Absolutely.
And trying to embody that love of God is really important, isn't it? This, and for us to understand that Christ is with us in the suffering as well as in the good times. That sense of God is with us, that's whatever correct. It is we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think also that it's it's not denying the suffering. It's not saying, oh, it's all going to be okay. I'm leaving you my peace. It's all going to be fine. Don't worry about it. That's not what he's saying. Is it? I'm giving you this peace that the world can't give. Shalom, wholeness, healing, whatever. And don't be afraid. But actually, I'm recognizing that you are afraid because fear is part of it. It's very real to be afraid. Yeah. And he's so I think there's a fine balance. But I think you've got to offer people that peace. But you've also got to say, but it's okay if you at this stage you cannot actually find that peace. But be assured that it doesn't have to be like this. But we've all got to work a lot harder to make the world a better place.
Yes, and this sense of, if we saw with Lydia, she heard the love of God and then she embodied the love of God, and that's really what we need to be doing, isn't it? We need to be embodying it through our words and our actions.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We've had a lovely wander through these texts, and I always love it when people quote Brueggemann at me. It's just wondrous. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your reflections and your understanding of these texts with us. And thank you to those who have
raised more questions and answers, but.
Well, I think more questions and answers is the way that faith goes, isn't it? The more I learn, the less I know. So that shows you've kind of done what we needed today. I'd like to thank everybody who's listened to the podcast this week. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you want to join in the conversations, the best place to do it is on Twitter at @pulpit_politics. Or #PoliticsInThePulpit, or on our Facebook community through the Joint Public Issues team. We have questions each week about the text, and I think this week the idea of empire. How do we embody something different to the empire that we are living in this world, and that we read in our text? How does understanding of empire affect our faith? If you've been listening for a while, you'll know that JPIT have their 2022 conference From the Ground Up, Unearthing Hope and Seeking Justice, on the 11th of June online and in London at Oasis Waterloo. We actually have a special discount offer for podcast listeners. By going to jointpublicissues.org.uk/conference and using the code podcast10, you can get 10% off your ticket, and under 25s and those on low incomes go free. A reminder of the code is podcast10, no spaces or lowercase. So I would like to thank you again, Lynita, for your time and for your wisdom. And we go into our pulpits, and we go into our everyday world with these things ringing in our ears. And I'd like to conclude this with the blessing. May you be anointed with God's Spirit as you bring good news to the poor, proclaim release the captives, help people to see the world truthfully, and let the oppressed go free. Amen. Thank you, Lynita. Goodbye.
Goodbye.